And so these enormous changes are without, of course, were not without consequences. You, again, probably hear throughout, the world, and not just in Canada, the struggles that we face at the society level, the substance abuse and the health problems, and most stressing of all, the suicide rates that are one of the highest in North America, in particularly from our young men from the ages of 16 to 24. But now, even young women are now taking their lives. And of course, the speed of change that has happened in our world is a great factor into this whole process, along with many historical traumas that have happened along the way. And so that is one of the saddest results, is trying to deal with our young people so that they may embrace life. But throughout this whole, from the first wave of tumultuous change, throughout this whole process, we have always had our way of life. We've always had the predictability of our land, the predictability of our climate and our environment, and the wisdom of our elders and our hunters to be able to help us to adjust and to adapt. Now that the second wave is coming in, and just as we reach for that wisdom once again, it seems to be melting very quickly, right below our feet. And so we remain that a hunting people, very reliant upon the cycles of nature and the healthy conditions of our environment. And the hunting culture is so misunderstood. It's not well understood, in fact, and it's not just about the killing of animals. For us, the process of the hunt is the real, and the wisdom of the land is indeed the real training ground for our young people as we prepare them for the opportunities and challenges of life. And in fact, we teach them just as they come out to the land on a regular basis, immediately they're taught patience, how to be bold under pressure, how to withstand stress, how to be courageous, how not to be impulsive. Because we're finding that the young men and women that are taking their lives, there's an issue of impulsivity here without a lot of thought about the ramifications or implications of taking one's life and what you leave behind in terms of the legacy of how people are trying to deal with that in their families and the communities. And so it's so important that the skills that are taught on the land are continued, especially for a transitioning culture such as ours in the Arctic, who are trying very hard to deal with these issues. And so judgment and wisdom ultimately is so important, because sometimes our institutional way of learning separates the character and the academic and never puts it back in another setting. For us, the hunting culture, the indigenous cultures, are very much holistic in the way that they prepare their children for the opportunities of life and the challenges of life. And so a hunting culture is more than just the killing of animals and the skinning of seals. It is very holistic. And so when I work on environmental issues, I am indeed working on it being a better place and a training ground for survival, not just on the land, but transferable skills for this modern world that we're facing today. So very few people have made this kind of connection. So it is really, when you talk about climate change, is an issue of our right and ability to exist as an Indigenous peoples. But precisely that right is being challenged and minimized by the unpredictability of our climate. And that's why, and I'm sure you have heard, the work that I've pioneered globally on the human rights petition connecting climate change to human rights, because of those very things that I'm talking about now, that it is not only about ice and polar bears, this is about a peoples who are trying to make it in this new world order of globalization. It's about families and children and communities. And in fact, it's about my grandson, who's turning 11 very soon, and the grandchildren of many in the Arctic who are already learning the hunting culture. And so after 2 years of preparation in December 2005, we submitted a 175-page climate change-related petition to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And as well as myself, the petition was filed on behalf of 62 Inuit in Alaska and in Canada, on behalf of all of us in the 4 countries in which we live. And we sought a declaration that the destruction of the Arctic environment and the culture economy of Inuit as a result of virtually unrestricted emissions of greenhouse gases by the United States, the source of approximately 25% of the worldwide emissions, is indeed violating the human rights as guaranteed by the 1948 American Declaration on the Rights and Duties of Man, including the rights to subsistence, to health, to our traditional lands, to our culture, to our environment, all of those rights that are already entrenched. And we were able to weave the changes that were happening with the 1948 Declaration on the Duties and Rights of Man. But the energy behind the petition is not one of confrontation or anger. In fact, it was a very strong assertion of our rights. There's no doubt about that, a legal assertion. It wasn't just a petition where one signs names to a certain endeavor. The purpose was to educate and to inform and encourage the government of the United States to join the community of nations in a global campaign to combat climate change, of course. And as I say, we were reaching out, not striking out, and in a real sense, I always say that this was a gift, not only to the United States, but to the world, a real act of generosity from our elders, from our hunters, from an ancient culture who is still deeply tied to the natural environment and still deeply in tune with the wisdom and the cycles of nature. A gift from us to an urban setting, to an industrial and modern culture that has largely lost its sense of place and position in the natural world. And that was the energy behind that. And in fact, it was not personal against the administration of the United States. However, it becomes personal when Inuit women in the 80s have to think twice about nursing their babies because of toxins coming from afar. It becomes personal when my grandson may lose what I had as a child as his foundation and his cultural heritage in his lifetime. So our petition was a way of reaching out and trying to turn, and this is my favorite picture of all, the most joyful person in the world who has no complaints at all about the cold. And this personifies for me our wonderful right to be cold, because this is what this is all about. Really, truly. This is really by far my most favorite picture, human picture. And so we have been trying through this process to change public opinion into public policy. And when people do ask me, what do you really do around the world as you speak? I say, well, what I try to do is change public opinion so it may eventually translate into public policy.